So, this piano teacher that I contacted actually had an opening, and he asked me about my musical history, had me come in to kind of gauge my skill level because he didn't take beginning students. And you know, even though I still played very badly, I guess at this point I had been playing around with the piano long enough that I at least had some kind of feel for it and knew my basic chords and stuff. So he was willing to take me on as a student. And the style of piano that he taught was jazz. So, I don't want to go into too much detail on this one right now because it's all very important. But I could go on talking about my teacher for hours. His name was Ed Donsero, and he was a musical genius, no doubt about it. And he was also one of the most unique and wonderful and larger-than-life people that I've ever met in my life. And I have to do a video about him at some point. But trying to keep this to somewhat of a summary, Ed, over the course of about 15 years of lessons, which is probably about twice as long as most students required, because I was lazy part of the time, at least as far as practicing like I was supposed to, and also I had my son a couple of years after I started taking lessons from Ed, because I started taking lessons from him when I was 27. And so then being a single mom made me have a lot more time constraints, you know, than what I'd had before. But anyway, over the course of about 15 years, he took all of my bad habits and broke them and reshaped them into good habits. Taught me many different jazz techniques. We went over, you know, we went through 1,000 songs probably, maybe more. I couldn't even tell you at this point. And probably about, well, let's see, about 13 years into that process, I realized one day that I was playing some really relatively difficult things at this point, and realized that I was starting to sound professional, and I was just kind of flabbergasted by this because I never thought that would happen. I never did. I knew that I was learning a lot from him and that I had improved a lot, but I thought I would never be anything more than, you know, a perpetual piano student who could play a little bit, and then just all of a sudden this realization, and it wasn't long after that realization that I actually stumbled into my first professional piano gig, which was at the Bistro, this very nice Mediterranean restaurant here in town. And I was there for 3 years. At one point, one of the local music magazines did an interview with me, which is posted online, and it's my one claim to fame, and anyone that I want to actually know me, I usually at some point send them the link for this because it's an important part of who I am, even though it was only 3 years there. I did have another concurrent gig, or for part of that time, at a hibachi grill in town that actually had live music called Samurai Steak and Sushi. And you know, this was just instrumental, and both gigs were very different because the atmosphere was different. I had a really nice piano to play at the bistro, but I had to keep things fairly toned down because I was definitely supposed to be background music, whereas at Samurai it's the opposite. You know, you've got all these hibachi chefs making tons of noise and all these flames going up, and people talking and laughing, so I could play whatever I wanted there, you know, quite a bit more loudly. And I didn't make much money. It was far from enough to survive on, but for most of that time I had a full-time job of some kind, so this was just supplemental income to me, and I loved it so much that, you know, it seemed like every weekend at some point I would pinch myself over the fact that I was actually getting paid to do this, to play piano. I just could not believe it. And for the first 6 months, probably, I was an absolute nervous wreck. My hands shook all the time. I learned to play with my hands shaking. But anyway, that was one of the best times of my life. Even regardless of whatever was going on in my personal life at the time, which wasn't anything great. I had this identity. I had this, I was able to perform. I mean, part of this time I was performing 4 nights a week, and it was making me better because I was getting live performance practice so many hours a week, you know, and I had this confidence that I'd never had before with my music. And then, of course, the bottom fell out of it all, which was not entirely a surprise because, I mean, my teacher had told me many times that, you know, the entertainment is always the first to go. If there's changes in the restaurants they're not that you're playing at, they're not doing as well, you know. But it was shocking, and it hurt me, and it took me a couple of years. I just couldn't even sit down and play. It was so hard on me, and anyway, I lost my train of thought there for a second. So, digressing a little bit, during this time period that I had been taking lessons from Ed, I had been in a couple of other bands, and I still was not where I needed to be with these bands. I still, even after all the training with Ed, playing by ear is just my weakness. I'm sure there are things that I could do if I was super, super motivated to try to learn to play by ear a whole lot better, but especially after me, or after taking lessons from Ed for so long, you know, we played from jazz charts, lead charts, fake charts, whatever you want to call them, and which is just the treble clef with a note for the melody, and then the chords. And in jazz, you play with certain left-hand techniques, so that's not even written out at all, the bass clef. And so anyway, that's what I was used to. That's what I was comfy with. But of course, in these bands, whether it's country or rock bands, which obviously the country stuff was easier, but in the rock bands especially, it just took me, it seemed like 10 times longer than any of the other band members to figure out how to play these songs, and especially if there's some specific keyboard part or piano part that I needed to figure out. It was difficult for me. And so and I guess going or fast forwarding to present day, I don't know, 2-3 years ago now, I guess, I had, just by kind of a fluke, started playing piano again and actually singing. It was being out with a friend on St. Patrick's Day and getting fairly ripped that actually made this happen. But I started singing, and my friend was highly encouraging of both my piano playing and my vocals. And instead of doing jazz, I'm doing like classic rock and pop, and actually started seeing what I could do with all of this, and started doing open mic down at Tidball's regularly, and got invited to do basically amateur hour, I guess, at a restaurant on the square called 440 Main. And I was getting quite a lot of positive feedback from other musicians and from patrons, you know. But I got some negative feedback too, because especially in rock circles, I guess, of musicians, a whole lot of them don't know how to read music, which is fine. There's plenty of musical geniuses out there who never learned to read. They didn't need to, you know. And and they all played by ear really, really well, which, you know, I'm envious of, and I really admire and respect these people. But with some of these musicians, it wasn't a two-way street. The fact that I needed chords, at least chords in front of me, I didn't have to have, I mean, I got to where I was working up a lot of songs that I couldn't find fake charts on, so I was purely learning these by ear, and, you know, it was taking me longer than it would most people, but if I loved a song enough, I would spend the time and make the effort to try to learn them. But I still need at least those chords written down in front of me. And so I've taken some flack from fellow musicians over the fact that I need some kind of at least chords in front of me, but also use some fake charts too. And so I got ridicule over that. I got ridiculed over the fact that I don't do any originals. And, you know, I've never had a thought that I was going to be some kind of creative musical genius. It's just not in me. I feel like if I had the talent to write, it would have shown up by now. I would have had some interest in it. Instead, I'm basically what you would call a lounge singer, like, you know, that SNL act that Bill Murray used to do, where I love these popular classic rock and pop songs. I love playing them, I love singing them, I love performing them, and people know them and seem to enjoy them, but I get no respect for that whatsoever. Apparently the only musicians you can respect are people who write their own songs. So anyway, because of that, and I also lost basically all of the sources of musical support that I had. You know, my friend that I used to, that got me singing and playing down at Tidball's, quit coming and playing music with me. My best friend, who was highly encouraging, we had to go our separate ways, and I sat here existing in a musical vacuum, and I eventually just couldn't. I lost my motivation. I wasn't getting enough positive feedback, and I didn't seem to really be getting anywhere with the open mics. I didn't feel like I was at a point where I could actually try to get a gig. And then all of this, you know, a lot of things went on that put me into a pretty deep depression, and I shut myself off from music. Pretty much, like, I wouldn't even let myself listen to the radio other than NPR, because everything was a reminder, and it was painful, of what I wasn't doing anymore, what I'd loved doing, but I could not find the motivation or the inspiration for. And, you know, I don't know that I found anyone else who can understand this. Why that I have just set it aside for like the last year. Why that I feel like I need some kind of emotional support. I mean, musical support to give me inspiration again, or something to give me inspiration. You know, if I were hugely talented and anywhere near a musical genius, I would know it. Everyone who heard me play would know it, and I could have that confidence level, but I don't, because I know I'm not there. I feel like I'm a decent pianist, you know, these days. I haven't lost all of my chops, although there are definitely a lot of things I've forgotten over the years since taking lessons with Ed, but still, there's a certain level of feel and expression that I have that I don't think I can lose. But my vocals, you know, they, I know they could use some work, and I'll listen to some recordings of myself and I'm kind of surprised and think, well, that actually sounds pretty good. But other times I listen to myself and I just feel like well, why would anyone want to listen to this more than anything else? There are so many musicians out there who are so much more talented, and I'm easily intimidated by anyone that I run into locally, let's say, because obviously I'm not intimidated by, famous world-class pianists. I mean, you know, I'm obviously not on their level, but when I run across people here who are more confident and more talented with vocals or piano, I feel like I can't hold much of a candle to that, and why would anyone even want me to perform, so I'm sure it sounds very weak and laughable, and I'm struggling to come up with the right term here. But I need musical support. I need someone telling me on a regular basis that I'm good and they want to hear me play, and that I shouldn't have stopped playing, and that I should start playing again and get my own gigs and all of this. I need that. I need that to I'm not gonna say I won't play at all without having that, but for me to get inspired and on fire musically again, and get really motivated, I need some musical support. And that is, listening to myself say it, that sounds very weak and codependent and all of that, but I can't help it. It's just the way it is. I will get myself playing some again, and who knows, maybe I'll actually get out and perform some again, but it is a real struggle right now for me, and I hate it because it feels like I've not lost, but hidden a large part of who I am. And I really hope that something, whatever it is, whatever it has to be, will occur sometime soon to get me back on that track. And the point that I meant to make and forgot to make was, the reason that I feel that I have this lack of confidence in my musical ability is, you can chalk it all up to, going through years and years and years and years from the time I was 7 years old till basically last year, of getting negativity about my music. Not complete negativity, and especially not once I actually became a professional pianist, but that definitely took me to a different confidence level, at least with my ability with the piano. But still, the negativity that I've gotten from some people about my vocals, or not doing originals, or using music, or whatever, it all chips away at whatever confidence that I've built in my musical ability. And that's why it's so helpful to me to have a musical cheerleader of sorts, and I really miss having that. And well, that was a really long spiel about music, but that, or musical talent, mine in particular, it is definitely a subject that I can go on about for days. So, thanks for listening, and I hope that made some kind of sense.